gray mare picked her way through the pine needles with the careful steps of a creature who knew these mountains better than the woman on her back. Martha Grace Sullivan had left Bitter Creek at first light, when the sky was still the color of cold ash and the saloon windows held nothing but darkness. 3 days now since she'd ridden out. 3 days since she'd turned her back on the promises that had crumbled like old adobe in the rain. The October wind cut through her woolen coat. Finding every gap in the fabric, she pulled the collar higher, her fingers stiff inside the leather gloves that had belonged to her father. Everything she owned now fit in the saddlebags a change of clothes. Her mother's Bible, $43, and a photograph she should have burned but couldn't bring herself to destroy. The pines grew thicker as she climbed higher into the mountains. Somewhere to the north lay Montana Territory, though she had no real destination in mind. Just away from the boarding house where she'd waited tables for 2 years, away from the church where she was supposed to have been married last spring, away from the pitying looks and whispered conversations that followed her like dust devils down Main Street. The mare snorted, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Martha patted her neck. "I know, girl, we'll find water soon." But the truth was, she didn't know these mountains. She'd followed what looked like an old game trail, trusting it would lead somewhere. Anywhere but back. The sun, what little showed through the heavy clouds, was already sliding toward the western peaks. She should stop soon, make camp while there was still light. A jay called from somewhere in the branches above, its harsh cry echoing through the silence. The trail narrowed, forcing her to duck beneath low-hanging boughs heavy with pine pitch. The smell filled her nostrils sharp, clean, nothing like the mixture of horse sweat, whiskey, and cheap perfume that clung to Bitter Creek. The mare stopped suddenly, ears pricked forward. Martha felt the tension in the animal's body, the way her muscles bunched beneath the saddle. "What is it? Belle?" Then she heard it too, the sound of water running over rocks. A creek, maybe 30 yards through the trees. She nudged Belle forward, already imagining the cold water on her face, filling her near-empty canteen. The ground sloped sharply downward. Belle picked her way carefully, but the pine needles were slick from the morning's frost that hadn't quite melted in the shadows. Martha leaned back in the saddle, giving the mare her head. It happened fast. Belle's front hoof found a patch of loose shale hidden beneath the needles. The rock gave way, and suddenly, they were sliding. Martha grabbed for the saddle horn, but Belle was already going down, her legs scrambling for purchase. The world tilted sideways. Martha kicked free of the stirrups just as Belle went to her knees. She hit the ground hard, her right leg twisting beneath her with a sound like a green branch snapping. Pain shot up from her ankle to her hip, white-hot and absolute. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the vast indifference of the pines. Belle had regained her footing and stood trembling a few feet away, reins trailing in the dirt. Martha tried to sit up, but the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her leg. She fell back, her breath coming in short gasps that did nothing to fill her lungs. The cold ground seeped through her coat. She could hear the creek now, so close but might as well have been a mile away. Her vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges. No, she couldn't pass out. Not here, not alone. "Belle," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The mare's ears flicked toward her, but she didn't move closer. Smart animal. No telling what Martha might do in her pain. Might grab at her, spook her into running. The daylight was fading faster now. Or maybe it was her vision. She tried to assess the damage. Her right leg lay at an angle that made her stomach turn. Broken. No doubt about it. Even if she could get back on Belle, she'd never be able to ride. A branch snapped somewhere in the growing darkness. Then another. Not the random sounds of wind or settling wood, but the deliberate noise of something moving through the underbrush. Martha's hand went to the Colt .45 on her hip, her father's gun that she'd cleaned and loaded but never fired at anything but empty bottles. The footsteps came closer, measured and careful. A man emerged from the shadows between the pines. and Martha's breath caught. He was tall, dressed in a mixture of white man's clothes and Indian garb canvas pants, a leather shirt decorated with beadwork, moccasins that made barely a whisper on the pine needles. His hair was black as crow feathers, worn long and held back with a strip of rawhide. Apache, she thought, though she'd only seen them from a distance in town. He stopped 10 feet away, his dark eyes taking in the scene, the woman on the ground, the leg bent wrong, the horse standing nervous guard. His face showed nothing, neither threat nor kindness, just assessment. "Don't come closer," Martha said, her hand tightening on the pistol grip. Her voice shook despite her effort to sound firm. He tilted his head slightly, and she saw the ghost of something that might have been amusement cross his features. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "You plan to shoot me before or after you freeze to death?" The absurdity of it, lying here with a broken leg, threatening the only person for miles who might help her, almost made her laugh. Or cry. She wasn't sure which. "I don't need help," she said, though they both knew it for the lie it was. He took a step closer, and she drew the pistol, though her hand shook so badly she doubted she could hit the broadside of a barn. He stopped again, raised his hands slightly to show they were empty. "Your leg is broken," he said, as if she might not have noticed. "Night comes soon, cold comes with it. Wolves hunt these ridges." Wolves? She hadn't thought about wolves. "What do you want?" The pistol was getting heavy. Her whole arm trembled with the effort of holding it. "Want?" He seemed to consider this. "I want to go home to my fire, but leaving a woman to die brings bad spirits." He gestured to her leg. "Let me look." "You a doctor?" "No doctor, but I know broken bones." The darkness was pressing in harder now. She could barely make out his features. Belle had moved closer to the trees, nervous but unwilling to abandon her rider entirely. Martha's hand wavered, and finally she let the pistol fall to her side. "If you're going to kill me, make it quick," she said. This time he did smile. Just barely. "If I wanted you dead, I would have stayed quiet. Let the mountain do the work." He moved then, smooth and quick despite his size. She tensed as he knelt beside her, but his hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her leg. She bit down on a scream when he touched her ankle. "Bad break," he said, "but clean. Can be set." He sat back on his heels, studied her in the failing light. "My cabin is near 1 mile, maybe less. I can take you there." "Why would you help me?" The question came out more suspicious than she'd intended. He stood, looked down at her with eyes that held depth she couldn't read. "Because winter comes early this year. Because a broken bird found in the path is meant to be helped. Because—" He paused, and she thought she saw something shift in his expression. "Because I choose to." He moved toward Belle, who surprisingly didn't shy away. His movements were calm, assured, as he gathered the trailing reins. Then he was back, sliding his arms beneath her. "This will hurt," he warned. It did. The world went white, then black, and she heard herself cry out as if from a great distance. She was vaguely aware of being lifted, of the strange sensation of being carried like a child. His chest was warm against her cheek, and he smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else. Something wild, like the pines themselves. "What's your name?" she managed to ask as he walked, her mare following behind like a faithful dog. "Joseph," he said. "Joseph Crow Feather." "Martha," she whispered. "Martha Sullivan." "Rest now." "Martha Sullivan," he said, and there was something in the way he said her name, careful and considered, like he was memorizing the shape of it. "The cabin is not far." The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful way he picked his path through the darkness, and the absurd thought that she'd left Bitter Creek to escape one fate, only to fall, literally, into another. But somehow, carried through the cold October night by this stranger who moved like smoke through the pines, she felt safer than she had in months. The stars were coming out above the canopy, cold and distant as the life she'd left behind. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and Joseph's arms tightened around her just slightly, a protection against more than just the fall. The cabin materialized from the darkness like something conjured from the mountain itself, logs weathered silver gray, chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney sending a thin line of smoke into the star-filled sky. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness as Joseph carried her through the door, aware only of warmth washing over her face and the blessed absence of wind. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, shelves holding supplies, and a table with 2 chairs that seemed to speak of some past companionship. Joseph laid her carefully on the bed, and she bit back another cry as her legs shifted. "I need to set the bone," he said, already moving to the shelves. He selected items with practiced efficiency: strips of cloth, 2 straight pieces of wood, a dark bottle. "The pain will be bad, but after, better." Martha watched him work, noting the scars on his hands, old and white against his copper skin. His movements were economical. No wasted motion. When he returned to her side, he held out the bottle. "Whiskey," he said. "Drink." She took it with shaking hands, the liquor burning down her throat. It was better than what they served in Bitter Creek, smoother. She took another swallow. "More," he instructed. By the 3rd drink, the edges of the room had gone soft. Joseph was gathering more supplies, a pot of water from near the fire. Clean cloths. He worked in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The cabin felt safe, removed from the world beyond its walls. "I need to cut your boot," he said, producing a knife from his belt. The blade caught the firelight. Martha nodded. The boots had been new last Christmas, a gift to herself, but they seemed unimportant now. He worked carefully, slicing through the leather, easing it off her swollen foot. Even through the whiskey haze, she gasped at the sight. Her ankle was twice its normal size, purple-black with bruising. "Look at the fire," Joseph said quietly. "Think of something else." "Like what?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Where you were going." He began to feel along the bones, his touch clinical but gentle. "Montana." "I don't know. Maybe anywhere." She fixed her eyes on the flames. "Just away." "Away can be a good destination." His hand stilled for a moment. "Ready." She nodded, gripping the rough blanket beneath her. The next moments were a blur of white-hot agony. She heard the bones grinding back into place, felt his hands firm and sure, holding everything steady. A scream tore from her throat, and then darkness rushed in like a mercy. When she woke, gray light was filtering through the single window. Her leg was splinted and wrapped, elevated on folded blankets. The pain had receded to a deep, constant ache. The cabin was warm, the fire built up, and the smell of something cooking made her stomach remind her she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Joseph sat at the table, working on something she couldn't see. He looked up when she stirred, his face unreadable in the morning light. "The bone is set well," he said. 6 weeks, maybe 8, before you can walk properly." 6 weeks. The reality of it settled over her like a stone. "I can't stay here that long." "Where else?" He rose, moved to the fire where a pot simmered. "Your horse needs rest. Snow comes soon. The passes will close." He brought her a cup, some kind of tea that smelled of pine and something bitter. "Drink. For the pain and to prevent fever." She sipped it, making a face at the taste. But he was already turning back to the fire. He ladled something into a bowl, brought it to her. Rabbit stew, she realized, with wild onions and roots she couldn't identify. Her stomach cramped with hunger. "Thank you," she managed between bites. He nodded, returned to his work at the table. She could see now he was fletching arrows, his hands steady as he attached feathers to the shafts. They sat in companionable silence while she ate. The only sounds, the crackling fire and the wind testing the walls. "Why do you live alone out here?" she asked finally. His hands paused in their work. "Why were you riding alone through the mountains?" Fair enough. She concentrated on the stew, but curiosity won. "It's just the chairs. There are two. My brother lived here, before." The words were clipped. Final. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, a gesture that could have meant anything. The mountain takes what it will. After she finished eating, he helped her sit up properly, propping her against the wall with folded blankets. The movement made her dizzy, but it was better than lying flat. She could see the cabin more clearly now. Everything had a place, a purpose. Herbs hung drying from the rafters. Tools lined one wall. A rifle stood in the corner, and she wondered why he'd used a bow the night before. "Your things," he said, gesturing to her saddlebags near the door. "I brought them in. Bell my horse. Fed and watered. There's a lean-to out back." She watched him move about the cabin, noting how he seemed to fill the space without making it feel small. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, though something in his eyes seemed older. "I have money," she said. "I can pay for—" "No." The word was flat, brooking no argument. "You don't pay for what's freely given." He went outside, returned with an armload of wood. As he stacked it by the fireplace, she noticed him favoring his left side slightly. "You're hurt." He glanced at her, something like surprise crossing his features. "Old wound. From before." "The war." "A different war." He straightened, dusted his hands. "I need to check my trap lines. You'll be safe here. Don't try to stand." Wait. But he was already reaching for a heavy coat made of what looked like buffalo hide. "What if someone comes?" "No one comes here." He paused at the door, looked back at her. "The rifle is loaded, if you need it, but you won't." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Martha sat in the sudden quiet, aware of how alone she was in this stranger's home. She should be frightened, she realized. A woman with a broken leg, dependent on a man she didn't know, miles from civilization. But fear wouldn't come. Instead, she felt something else, a curious peace, as if the cabin existed outside the normal flow of time and consequence. She dozed, waking when the door opened again. Joseph entered with 2 rabbits hanging from his belt and something wrapped in cloth. He went about the business of skinning and cleaning the rabbits with practiced efficiency. But she noticed him glance at her now and then, as if assuring himself she was still there. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 4 winters. He worked without looking up. "Since my brother died." "And before?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Many places. Army scout for a time. Before that, the reservation. Before that—" He shrugged. "I was young. The world was different." She wanted to ask more, but sensed the door closing on that topic. Instead, she watched him work, noted the careful way he saved every useful part of the rabbits. Wasted nothing. As afternoon wore toward evening, he surprised her by bringing out a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside were medical supplies, real bandages, a bottle of laudanum, other things she didn't recognize. "Army supplies," she guessed. "A doctor passed through last summer, paid for a guide with these." He prepared to change her bandages, his movements careful and impersonal. "Said I might need them someday." "Lucky for me." He glanced up at her then, and she caught something in his expression, a flicker of what might have been warmth. Perhaps luck, perhaps something else. He rewrapped her leg with fresh bandages, his touch clinical but gentle. She found herself studying his face, the sharp planes of cheekbone and jaw, the way his hair fell forward as he worked, the concentration that drew his brows together. "There," he said, sitting back. "Better." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The laudanum he'd given her was making everything soft around the edges. But it wasn't just the medicine. Something about this place, this unexpected sanctuary, was working its way under her defenses. As night fell, he prepared a simple meal, and they ate in comfortable silence. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, but the cabin felt solid, unshakable. Joseph added wood to the fire, then surprised her by taking down a book from the shelf. "You read?" The question came out before she could stop it, tinged with assumptions she immediately regretted. His look was sardonic. "The missionaries insisted, though they probably didn't intend for me to read this." He showed her the cover Emerson's essays. "Self-reliance," she murmured. "My father loved that one." A wise man. He settled in the chair by the fire, the book open on his lap, but didn't read. Instead, he stared into the flames, and she wondered what he saw there. "I should sleep in the barn," he said suddenly. "It isn't proper." "No." The word surprised them both. She cleared her throat. "I mean, this is your home. I'm the intruder, and it's cold." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll sleep by the fire." She watched him arrange blankets on the floor, efficiency in every movement. When he lay down, she could see only his profile in the firelight, strong and still as carved stone. "Joseph," she said softly. "Yes, thank you for everything." He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "Rest now, Martha Sullivan. Tomorrow will be better." She closed her eyes, listening to the fire pop and the wind sing around the corners of the cabin. 6 weeks, he'd said. 6 weeks in this strange haven with this enigmatic man. Back in Bitter Creek, they'd call it scandalous. But Bitter Creek seemed like another lifetime, another woman's life. Here in the shelter of smoke and wood, with her leg throbbing its rhythm of healing and a stranger keeping watch by the fire, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe, and perhaps, though she hardly dared name it, something like hope. The days took on a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Martha woke each morning to find Joseph already up, the fire built back to warmth, coffee brewing in a battered pot. He would nod his greeting, pour her a cup, then disappear outside to tend the horses or check his trap lines. She learned to gauge time by his absences, an hour for the nearest traps, half a day for the farther ones. The first week passed in a haze of pain and laudanum-softened edges. But as her body began to heal, her mind sharpened, taking in details she'd missed before. The way Joseph moved through the cabin like smoke, barely disturbing the air. How he could sit for hours working leather or wood. His hands never idle, but his presence so still she sometimes forgot he was there. The careful distance he maintained, never coming closer than necessary, as if she were a wild creature that might spook. "You're up early," he said one morning, finding her sitting upright without support. The birds woke me. She'd been listening to them for an hour, trying to identify their calls. "What's the one that sounds like water running?" "Canyon wren. They nest in the rocks above the creek." He handed her the coffee, his fingers careful not to touch hers. "Pain better today?" Yes, it was, though still constant as her own pulse. "I think I could try standing soon." "No." The word was firm. 4 more weeks at least. Bones need time. She wanted to argue, but had learned it was pointless. Joseph could be as immovable as the mountains themselves when he chose. Instead, she watched him prepare for another day's work, noting how he favored his left side when he thought she wasn't looking. "That old wound," she said. "You should let me look at it." He paused in the act of reaching for his coat. "It's nothing. I've done some doctoring. My mother taught me." "It's healed." "Healed wrong. Maybe." She recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "You tend my hurts. Let me tend yours." He stood still for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, slowly, he set down the coat and began unbuttoning his shirt. When he turned, she caught her breath. The scar ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs, white and ropey against his copper skin. But it was the muscle around it that concerned her, knotted and twisted, pulling his shoulder slightly forward. "Cavalry saber," he said quietly. "8 winters ago." She didn't ask for details. The war between the Army and the Apache was recent enough that everyone knew the stories. Instead, she studied the damage with clinical eyes. "Sit," she said, "please." He lowered himself to the floor beside the bed, his back to her. She reached out carefully, her fingers finding the worst of the knots. He flinched but didn't pull away. "The muscle healed short," she said, working gently. "It's why you hurt when the weather changes." "How do you know about the weather?" "You've been favoring it more the last 2 days. Storm coming." He made a sound that might have been amusement. "You see much, Martha Sullivan?" "I've had little else to do but watch." Her hands worked steadily, feeling the muscles slowly release. "This helps." "Yes." The word came out rough, and she realized this was probably the first gentleness he'd felt in years. They sat in silence while she worked, the fire crackling, wind beginning to pick up outside. When she finally stopped, her hands aching, he turned to look at her. Something had shifted in his dark eyes, a guardedness easing just slightly. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, the promised storm arrived. Wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, and snow began to fall in earnest. Joseph built the fire higher and surprised her by sitting in the chair near the bed instead of retreating to his usual spot by the hearth. "Tell me about Bitter Creek," he said. She laughed, short and bitter. "Nothing good to tell." "Then tell me something else. The talking helps pass storm nights." So she found herself speaking of other things, her childhood in Missouri, before her father decided to head west. Her mother's death on the trail. The early years in Bitter Creek, when it was barely more than a trading post. She talked about teaching school before the town got too big and hired a proper schoolmaster from back east. About the boarding house where she'd worked. The women there who'd become almost like sisters. "And the man?" Joseph asked quietly. She stiffened. "What man? The one who put shadows in your eyes?" Martha was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow build on the window ledge. "Thomas Morrison. Owned the general store. Everyone said I was lucky he was successful, handsome, from a good family back east." She pulled the blanket higher. "We were to marry in May." "What happened?" "His wife arrived from St. Louis." The words came out flat. "The one he forgot to mention, with their 3 children." Joseph made no sound of sympathy, offered no platitudes. He simply sat, present and solid, while the storm raged outside. "The whole town knew before I did," she continued. "I was serving breakfast at the boarding house when she walked in, asking for directions to her husband's store. Described him perfectly." She laughed again. No humor in it. "I spent 2 years being courted by a lie." "So you left." "So I left." She met his eyes. "Your turn. Tell me something." He considered, then began to speak about his brother, David. He'd been called their mother had given them both white names along with their Apache ones. David had been the dreamer, always talking about bridging 2 worlds, finding peace between peoples that seemed born to conflict. He believed words could stop bullets. Joseph said, "Even after," he gestured to his scarred back, "even after everything, he believed." "How did he die?" "Trying to stop a fight. Miners had been pushing into sacred land. A group of young Apache warriors wanted blood. David rode out to talk peace." Joseph stared into the fire. "Both sides shot him." Martha reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. He went very still, looking down at her pale fingers against his darker skin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He turned his hand palm up, let her fingers rest in his for just a moment before gently withdrawing. It was 3 winters past. The grief is older now. But she could see it wasn't. Not really. Grief never grew old, just familiar. The storm continued for 2 days. They passed the time with small activities, Joseph teaching her Apache words for things in the cabin, Martha mending tears in his clothes with neat, careful stitches. He showed her how to fletch arrows, her fingers clumsy at first but gradually learning the rhythm. She told him about books she'd read, stories she'd loved, and was surprised to find he knew many of them. The missionaries, he explained with that sardonic smile. They thought stories of their God would change us. Instead, I preferred their other books, Shakespeare, Milton, the Greeks. A warrior who reads Homer, she mused. What would Bitter Creek think? What does Martha Sullivan think? She looked at him, really looked, saw not the savage the town would see, but a man of complexities and contradictions, gentle hands that could set bones or draw a bow, eyes that held violence and kindness in equal measure, a mind that moved between two worlds with a grace her own never could. I think, she said slowly, that I've been a fool about many things. On the third morning, she woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in white. Joseph stood at the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. Beautiful, she said, and dangerous. The passes are closed now. No one travels in or out until spring. She should have felt trapped, but instead felt only a curious relief. The world beyond these walls, with its judgments and expectations, seemed very far away. That evening, as they ate venison stew, Joseph surprised her with a question. Your father's gun, you know how to use it. I can shoot bottles off a fence. Not the same as shooting to survive. He studied her. When you're healed, I'll teach you. A woman alone should know more than bottles. I won't be alone forever, she said, then heard how it sounded. I know what you meant. But something flickered in his eyes. Still, good to know. Later, as he banked the fire for the night, she watched the familiar ritual of blankets on the floor. 3 weeks now, and he'd never complained, never suggested anything improper. A gentleman in ways Thomas Morrison had never been. Joseph. He looked up from arranging his makeshift bed. Does it bother you having me here, disrupting your peace? He was quiet for a moment. You assume I had peace before. Didn't you? I had solitude. Not the same thing. He lay down, settling into the blankets. Sleep now. Martha, your body needs rest to heal. But she lay awake long after his breathing deepened, thinking about the difference between solitude and peace, about the way his hand had felt under hers, about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this cabin and this complicated man. Outside, an owl called, and its mate answered from somewhere in the pines. The sound was lonely and lovely all at once, like everything in this mountain refuge, like the growing feeling in her chest that she didn't yet have words for, or perhaps was afraid to name. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the morning, Joseph would rise first, as always, and brew coffee, and another day would begin. But for now, in the darkness with the snow muffling all sound, Martha let herself imagine that this moment could stretch forever, two souls finding shelter from their storms, building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. Her leg ached, a deep throb that reminded her of her helplessness. But beneath the pain was something else, a different kind of ache, sweet and terrifying. She closed her eyes and listened to Joseph breathe, steady and sure as the mountains themselves, and felt herself falling towards something that had no bottom, no safety net, only the hope that someone might catch her when she landed. The nightmare came in the depths of winter's grip. Martha woke gasping, her mother's face still vivid behind her eyelids, pale and burning with fever on that endless Nebraska plain. She sat up too quickly, sending pain shooting through her healing leg. Martha. Joseph's voice came from the darkness. She heard him rise, heard the whisper of his feet on the floor. What is it? Nothing. A dream. But her voice shook, and her nightgown was damp with sweat despite the cold. He lit a candle, the small flame pushing back the dark, In its glow, his face was all plains and shadows, concern written in the furrow of his brow. The same dream. She nodded. He knew about the nightmares now. 4 weeks of sharing close quarters had worn away many barriers. She died calling for water. I couldn't find any. The whole train had run dry, and I couldn't— The words choked off. Joseph moved to the stove, lit it with practiced movements. Soon the kettle was heating. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort. He simply made tea, the pine needle brew that had become familiar, and brought it to her. "You were 12, he said finally, settling in the chair beside the bed. "A child. Old enough to help, old enough to fail." "Is that what you tell yourself, that you failed?" His dark eyes studied her. A woman who rode alone into mountains she didn't know, seeking something she couldn't name. This is failure. "I was running away." "No, you were running toward different thing." He sipped his own tea, steam rising between them. "Tell me about her. Not the dying, before." So Martha found herself talking about her mother's laugh, the way she could make music from anything: spoons, washboards, even the wind in the grass. How she'd insisted on bringing books west, trading precious food space for Shakespeare and Shelley. The way she'd made their weathered wagon feel like home with scraps of fabric and wildflower bouquets. "She would have liked you," Martha said without thinking, then felt heat rise in her cheeks. Joseph's expression didn't change, but something softened around his eyes. "Because I make good tea." "Because you see things, really see them. She was like that." Martha set down her cup, fingers trembling slightly. "She saw people, not what she expected them to be. A rare gift." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother had it too." "Had?" "Died when David and I were young. Soldiers came to the winter camp. She hid us in the rocks, told us not to move, not to make a sound." His voice was steady, but Martha saw the way his hands tightened on his cup. "We obeyed, even when we heard the screams." "Joseph?" "I was 7 winters. David was 5. We stayed in those rocks for 2 days, afraid to come out. When we finally did," he shrugged, the gesture encompassing horrors he wouldn't name. "An uncle found us eventually, raised us until the reservation." They sat in silence, 2 orphans sharing the weight of old grief. The candle burned lower, and Joseph rose to tend the fire. Martha watched him work, noting the careful grace of his movements, the way he handled even simple tasks with attention. "Is that why you live here?" she asked. "Away from everyone?" He considered the question, adding wood to the flames. "Partly. The reservation was difficult. They wanted us to forget who we were, become farmers, Christians. David tried harder than I did." A bitter smile touched his lips. "I was too angry. Fought everything, everyone. When I was old enough, I left, became a scout. Thought if I helped the army, I could protect what was left of my people. But it didn't work that way." "No." He returned to the chair, his face half in shadow. "I led soldiers to camps I'd played in as a child, translated lies I knew were lies. Watched my people starve while beef meant for them went to white settlements." His hand unconsciously touched his scarred back. "The day I got this, I was trying to stop soldiers from firing on women gathering roots. My commander said I'd gone native, forgotten which side I was on." "Had you?" "I never knew which side I was on. That was the problem." He met her eyes. "David understood before I did. Said we had to find a third way, neither white nor Apache, but something new. He found this place, convinced me to come after—" He gestured vaguely. "After everything fell apart." Martha reached out, caught his hand before he could pull back. His fingers were warm, calloused, strong. "I'm glad you did. Found this place. I mean—" He looked down at their joined hands, and she saw something flicker across his face: surprise. "Maybe, or something deeper. So am I," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, delicate as frost. Then Joseph gently withdrew his hand and stood. "You should sleep," Dawn comes early. But Martha knew sleep wouldn't return easily. Too many ghosts crowded the cabin now. Her mother and his, all the losses that had shaped them into who they were. Do you ever wonder what we'd be like if none of it had happened? No. His answer was immediate. That way lies madness. We are who our sorrows made us, as much as our joys. I had joys once, she said softly. I think I'd forgotten. You'll have them again. How can you be sure? He paused at his makeshift bed, looking back at her. Because you're here, because you survived, because... He stopped, seemed to change what he'd been about to say, because spring always comes, even after the hardest winter. Martha lay back, pulling the blankets high, but she watched him in the dying firelight. This man who'd lost as much as she had, maybe more, who'd found a way to continue when continuing seemed impossible. Joseph, she whispered. Thank you for the tea, for listening. Always, he said so quietly she almost missed it. The next morning brought sun, brilliant on new snow. Joseph helped her to the chair by the window, her leg finally strong enough for small movements. She watched him work outside, splitting wood with smooth, powerful strokes. Belle and his paint horse stood in the shelter, breath steaming in the cold air. When he came back in, his cheeks were red with cold, snow in his black hair. He looked younger, almost boyish, and Martha felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again. You're smiling, he observed, hanging up his coat. The sun, it's been so long since we've seen it. 3 days, not so long. It felt longer. She shifted in the chair, wincing. Everything feels longer here. Time moves differently in the mountains. He knelt to examine her leg, his touch impersonal but gentle. The healing goes well. Another 2 weeks, you can try standing. And then, his hand stilled on the bandages, then you get stronger, learn to walk again. And after that, he looked up at her, and she saw he understood what she was really asking. Spring will come, the passes will open. You'll have choices to make. What if I've already made them? The words hung between them like suspended breath. Joseph finished with the bandages, stood slowly. Martha, I know. She cut him off, not ready to hear rejection, not yet. I know all the reasons why. Sometimes I forget them. When you're here, when we talk, I forget why this couldn't work. It's the solitude, he said carefully. Being alone so long, then having company. It makes feelings seem stronger than they are. Is that what you tell yourself? He turned away, busied himself at the stove. Yes. Liar. The word made him go still. When he turned back, something raw showed in his face before he could hide it. What would you have me say, that I watch you sleep and memorize the way your hair catches morning light? That your laughter, rare as it is, sounds like music I'd forgotten existed? That having you here has broken my careful peace and I can't find it in myself to mind? He stopped, jaw tight. These are things that shouldn't be said. Why not? Because you'll heal and leave, as you should. Find a life in some town where people won't stare, won't whisper, where you can have what you deserve, a home, children, respectability. I had respectability in Bitter Creek. It was worth less than the mud on my boots. She leaned forward, ignoring the pull in her leg. Joseph, I'm not some foolish girl spinning romantic dreams. I know what the world would say about us. I've had weeks to think about it, and I find I don't care. You should care. His voice was rough. You don't know what it means to live between worlds, belonging to neither. To have people look at your children and see only their mixed blood. Children! The word escaped before she could stop it. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. Martha, please! She wanted to push, to make him admit what she could see in every careful gesture, every stolen glance. But something in his expression stopped her. Too much pain lived there. Too many wounds that hadn't healed as clean as her broken bone. "All right," she said quietly. "But Joseph, I'm not as fragile as you think, and I'm not going anywhere for at least 2 weeks. That surprised a small smile from him. Stubborn woman. Man who reads Homer should know about stubborn women. Penelope waited 20 years. Penelope had a home to wait in, a place in the world. Maybe she was waiting for those things too. Maybe Odysseus brought them with him when he returned. Joseph studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. You argue like a missionary, twisting stories to suit your purpose. Or like a teacher, finding new meanings in old tales. That evening, as they shared their simple meal, the weight of unspoken words sat between them like a third presence. But somehow it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a seed planted in frozen ground, waiting for the right moment to grow. Martha thought of her mother again, but this time the memory brought warmth instead of pain. Her mother who'd seen beauty in the harsh prairie, who'd made homes from nothing, who'd loved without reservation even when love seemed foolish. She would have liked you, she said again. And this time Joseph smiled, small and real. Because I make good tea, he agreed. And Martha laughed, the sound bright in the cabin's warmth. Outside, winter held the mountains in its grip, but inside, something else was taking hold, patient and persistent as the spring that would surely come. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds that swallowed the peaks. Joseph had been watching the sky all morning, his movements sharp with urgency as he brought in extra wood, checked the shutters, secured everything that might blow away. Bad one coming, he said, filling every available container with water. Could last days. Martha had progressed to hobbling short distances with a makeshift crutch, and she used it now to move to the window. The world outside had turned an ominous yellow-gray, the air itself seeming to hold its breath. I've seen storms before, she said. Not like this. He pulled on his heavy coat. I need to bring the horses into the barn's inner stall. Together they'll stay warmer. Be careful. He paused at the door, looked back at her with an expression she couldn't read. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anything until I knock 3 times. Joseph! But he was gone, swallowed by the rising wind. Martha barred the door as instructed, her heart beating faster than it should. Through the window, she could barely make out his form moving toward the barn. Then the snow began not falling, but driving sideways, thick as a curtain. Minutes passed. 10, 20. The wind rose to a howl that made the cabin shake. Martha pressed her face to the glass, seeing nothing but white fury. Where was he? A bang against the wall made her jump. Just the wind, she told herself, but her hands shook as she added wood to the fire. 30 minutes now. How long did it take to move 2 horses? When the 3 knocks finally came, she nearly collapsed with relief. Joseph stumbled in with a blast of snow, ice coating his eyebrows and beard. His lips were blue with cold. Horses are safe, he managed through chattering teeth. Martha helped him to the fire, pulled off his frozen gloves. His hands were like ice. Without thinking, she pressed them between her own, rubbing warmth back into the stiff fingers. Your leg, he protested weakly. Hush. She focused on his hands, trying not to think about how natural it felt to touch him this way. What took so long? Belle spooked, broke loose, had to track her by feel. He shivered violently. Never seen her so scared. Animals know, Martha said. They always know. The storm hit full force as darkness fell. The wind became a living thing, screaming around the cabin, testing every chink, every board. Snow built against the windows until they were blind to the outside world. The walls groaned under the assault. Martha had returned to the bed, her leg protesting the activity. Joseph fed the fire constantly, but still the cold crept in. She could see her breath in the air. Come here, she said finally. when his shivering wouldn't stop. "You'll freeze on the floor tonight." "Martha, this is about survival, not propriety." She moved over, patting the narrow space beside her. "Please." He hesitated so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, moving stiffly, he joined her on the bed, careful to stay above the blankets, his back to her. She could feel the cold radiating from him. "You're like ice," she murmured, pulling extra blankets over them both. They lay rigid as boards, the storm raging outside, neither speaking, but slowly, shared warmth began to work its magic. Joseph's shivering eased. The terrible cold retreated to the edges of the room. "Better?" she asked softly. "Yes." His voice was rough. "Thank you." The wind screamed louder, and something crashed outside, a tree falling, maybe, or part of the barn roof. Joseph tensed. "The horses." "We'll be fine. You built that barn to last." She found his shoulder in the dark, felt the iron tension there. "Rest. There's nothing to do until it passes." "I should... Joseph." She let all her exhaustion show in her voice. "Please, just be still. Be here. The world won't end if you stop fighting it for one night." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Stubborn woman." "So you keep saying." They lapsed into silence. But it was different now. The space between them hummed with awareness. Martha could hear his breathing, feel the warmth of him so close. Her whole body seemed to wake up, every nerve singing. "Tell me something," she said, needing distraction. "Something good, a memory from before all the loss." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Summer hunts, before the soldiers, before the boundaries. My father would take David and me into the mountains. We'd be gone for weeks, just us in the sky." His voice softened with memory. "He taught us to read the stars, to find water by watching birds, how to move silent as shadows." "It sounds like freedom." "It was the last real freedom I knew." He shifted slightly. "Your turn. Something good." Martha searched her memories, pushing past recent pain to find older joys. "Christmas Eve, I was 9. We were still in Missouri, and it snowed 3 feet overnight. My father couldn't get to the barn, so he brought our milk cow into the kitchen." She smiled at the memory. "My mother was furious at first, but then the cow looked at her with those big eyes, and snow on her lashes, and Mother just started laughing. We all did. Spent Christmas Eve with a cow by the stove, drinking fresh milk and singing carols." A cow in the kitchen. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Your mother sounds like she adapted well." "She did, until she couldn't anymore." Martha closed her eyes against the familiar ache. "I think that's what killed her. Really, not the fever. She just ran out of strength to adapt." Joseph turned then, facing her in the darkness. She could barely make out his features, but she felt his gaze. "You didn't run out of strength." "Sometimes I think I have. Sometimes I think I'm just going through motions, pretending at living." "No." His hand found hers under the blankets. "What you're doing here, what you've done leaving everything behind, starting over, that takes more strength than most people have in a lifetime. Or more foolishness. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes." The wind gusted so hard the whole cabin shuddered. Martha instinctively moved closer, and Joseph's arm came around her, protective. They froze, both suddenly aware of the line they'd crossed. "I should," he started. "Don't." She pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and pine that clung to him. "Just for tonight, while the storm rages, can't we just be?" His arm tightened around her. She felt him struggle, duty and desire warring in the tension of his body. Then, gradually, he relaxed. "The storm," he said quietly, like a confession. "It makes everything feel different, separate from the world." "Yes?" They held each other as the blizzard tried to tear the cabin apart. Neither slept. too aware of each breath, each heartbeat. Martha had never felt anything like this, not with Thomas, not with anyone. This electric awareness, this sense of standing on a precipice. "I'm afraid," she whispered into the darkness. Of the storm, of the morning, of what happens when this ends. Joseph's hand found her hair, stroked it gently. "We survive. We continue. We make choices. Together." The question hung between them like a held breath. Outside, the wind screamed its fury, but inside their small circle of warmth, everything went still. "I don't know," he said finally, honestly. Martha, you don't understand what you're asking. The world outside this cabin? Hang the world." The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. "I've lived by the world's rules. Joseph followed every expectation, every proper path. Where did it lead to lies and humiliation and a life that felt like slow death?" She pulled back enough to see his face in the dim light. "This us, it may be impossible. It may be foolish. But it's the first true thing I've felt in years." He cupped her face in his hand, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You think I don't feel it too. You think I don't lie awake counting your breaths, memorizing your laugh, storing up moments like a miser with gold." His voice broke slightly. "But feeling isn't enough. Not in the world we have to live in." "Then let's not live in that world. Let's make our own. Where how you think we can just disappear into these mountains forever." "Why not?" She was crying now, tears hot on her cheeks. "Why not? Joseph, what's waiting for either of us out there that's worth more than this?" He wiped her tears with gentle fingers, his own eyes bright with unshed moisture. "You say that now, but when your leg heals, when spring comes, when you remember all the things you're giving up." "I'm not giving up anything I haven't already lost, and I'm gaining." She stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she wanted to say. "What?" His voice was raw. "What are you gaining?" "You," she whispered. "Just you. Isn't that enough?" The storm reached a crescendo, shaking the cabin to its foundations, and Joseph Crowfeather, warrior and scholar, man of two worlds and citizen of neither, finally broke. He pulled her to him and kissed her with all the desperate longing of their shared solitude, all the pain of their losses, all the hope neither had dared voice. When they parted, both breathing hard, the storm still raged. But something had shifted. Some wall had fallen that couldn't be rebuilt. "Martha," he said, her name a prayer and a plea. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons why not. Tell me one reason why." He was quiet for a long moment, holding her close while the wind tried to tear their shelter apart. Finally, he spoke, so soft she almost missed it. "Because I love you. God help me, I love you." The words hung in the air like a promise, like a curse, like the only truth that mattered in a world gone white with storm. Martha closed her eyes and held on tight, feeling the cabin shake around them, feeling her heart break and remake itself in a new shape, one that had room for impossible things. Outside, the blizzard raged on, trying to tear down everything humans had built, but inside, two people held each other and chose love over fear, chose each other over all the sensible reasons not to, and for tonight at least. While the storm made them the only two people in the world, it was enough. The morning after the storm dawned impossibly bright, sunlight dancing on snow that lay thick as forgiveness over the world. Martha woke to find Joseph already up, feeding the fire, but something had changed in the way he moved a lightness, as if he'd set down a burden he'd carried too long. "How deep?" she asked, sitting up carefully. 3 feet, maybe 4 in the drifts." He turned to her, and the smile that crossed his face made her heart skip. "The horses are fine, hungry, but fine." They looked at each other across the small space, last night's confessions hanging between them like morning mist. Then Joseph crossed to her, sat on the edge of the bed, took her hands in his. "In daylight," he said quietly. "Do you still—" "Yes," she didn't let him finish. "More, if anything, you—" Instead of answering with words, he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sure. When they parted, his dark eyes held a warmth she'd never seen before. "So," she said, suddenly shy, "what happens now?" "Now." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Now we dig out. We tend the horses. We live, Martha, but differently than before." The next days passed in a golden haze. They were snowed in completely. The world reduced to their small cabin and the path Joseph shoveled to the barn. But instead of feeling trapped, Martha felt free. Free to touch his hand when she passed him. Free to lean into his shoulder as they sat by the fire. Free to wake in his arms and feel no shame. Only wonder. Joseph taught her Apache words in the evening firelight, his voice soft as he corrected her pronunciation. She told him stories from the books she'd loved, acting out different characters until he laughed a rich, rare sound she hoarded like treasure. "You should have been on a stage," he said one night, after her dramatic rendition of Lady Macbeth. "A schoolteacher from Missouri, treading the boards," she smiled. "What would people say?" "That you were magnificent." He pulled her closer. "As you are here." They talked of everything and nothing, of dreams they'd abandoned and ones they might yet pursue. Joseph spoke of wanting to write down the stories his grandmother had told, preserve them before they were lost. Martha confessed her secret wish to study medicine properly, not just the folk healing her mother had taught her. "Why didn't you?" he asked. "Women don't become doctors, not real ones." "Some do. I read about one in Philadelphia." "Philadelphia might as well be the moon from here." "Maybe. Or maybe the moon is closer than we think." He was quiet for a moment. "David used to say the impossible only stays impossible until someone proves otherwise. Your brother was a philosopher. He was a dreamer. But sometimes—" Joseph stared into the fire. "Sometimes dreamers see truest." One afternoon, Martha stood for the first time without the crutch, her leg held, weak but healing. Joseph caught her as she swayed, and they ended up dancing slowly around the cabin, her weight mostly on him, humming a tune her mother used to sing. "I haven't danced since—" She trailed off, not wanting to bring Thomas into this sacred space. "Nor I. Not since before David died." He spun her carefully. "We make a fine pair of hermits, learning to live again." "Is that what we're doing, learning to live?" "What else would you call it?" She thought about it as they swayed together. "Coming home. It feels like coming home to a place I've never been." That night by the fire, she asked the question that had been haunting her. What happens when the snow melts, when the world comes back? Joseph was quiet for a long time, carving a piece of wood that was slowly becoming a bird. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to stay." The words came out fierce. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to learn everything you can teach me. I want to plant a garden and raise horses and never have to smile politely at another town gossip again." She took a breath. "I want to marry you, if you'll have me." His hand stilled on the carving. "Martha, I know what I'm asking. I know what it means. Mixed marriage isn't legal in half the territories. People will—" "I don't care about people." He set down the carving, took her face in his hands. "But I care about you, about what this choice would cost you. What has respectability ever given me but heartache?" "Children," he said quietly. "Your children would be ours. They'd be ours." She covered his hands with hers. "And we'd raise them to be bridge builders, like David dreamed, to live in both worlds and make them better for it. You make it sound simple." "Love is simple. It's people who make it complicated." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she tasted salt and knew he was crying. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes to all of it. God help us both. Yes." They made plans by firelight, practical and dreamy by turns. Joseph knew a judge in Denver who might marry them, law or no law. They could expand the cabin, add rooms for the children Martha spoke of with such certainty. Joseph could guide hunting parties in summer. Martha could take in sewing or teach the few scattered children in the mountain settlements. Or we could go farther west. Joseph suggested California, Oregon, places where people care less about bloodlines. Would you want that to leave these mountains? He looked around the cabin, then back at her. This place saved me when I needed saving, but it's just wood and stone. Home is... He stopped, smiled. Home is where you are. When did you become a poet? She teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. You've corrupted me with your books and stories. He pulled her against his side. Though I warn you, I'll never quote Shakespeare properly. I'll love you anyway. They were quiet then, watching the fire burn low. Outside, an owl called, and the wind sighed through the pines. The world felt hushed, waiting, as if it too held its breath for what would come next. Joseph, Martha said finally. That first night, when you found me, why did you really help? You could have left me, gone for someone else to deal with it. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you reminded me of a story my grandmother told, about a warrior who found a star that had fallen to earth. The star was hurt, couldn't fly back to the sky, so the warrior cared for it. And in time, the star chose to stay on earth, to be human, to love him in return. He smiled self-consciously. Foolish. I know. Not foolish. Martha turned in his arms, looked up at him. Maybe your grandmother was a dreamer too. Maybe she saw true. Maybe she did. He kissed her forehead. My fallen star. Your stubborn patient. My love. The words hung in the air like a blessing. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the slow dig out from the storm, the careful rehabilitation of her leg, the eventual thaw that would reconnect them to a world that might not understand what they'd found. But tonight, in their cabin made warm by love and firelight, they had everything they needed. Martha dozed against Joseph's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palm. She thought of her mother, of Joseph's grandmother, of all the women who'd loved boldly despite the odds. She thought of David, the brother who'd dreamed of bridges between worlds, and felt his blessing in the peaceful silence. Thank you, she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Joseph or to fate itself. For what? His voice was drowsy, content. For catching me when I fell. His arms tightened around her. Always, he said, always. The fire burned to embers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the snow lay deep and undisturbed, holding them apart from the world for a little longer. And in the warmth of their chosen home, two people who'd thought themselves beyond saving held each other and planned a future neither had dared imagine alone. Love had come quiet as snowfall, unexpected as grace, and like the spring that would surely follow winter, it would not be denied. The world returned with the sound of horses. Martha was kneading bread dough, her movements sure and strong now that her leg had healed, when she heard them multiple hooves picking their way up the muddy trail. Joseph appeared in the doorway, his face carefully neutral, the rifle held loose but ready in his hands. How many? She asked quietly. 3, maybe 4. He moved to the window. Stay inside. But Martha had learned to read the set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw. These weren't random travelers. She wiped her floury hands on her apron, one of several domestic touches that had appeared over the winter months, and moved to stand beside him. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. The lead man was tall, well-dressed despite the mountain mud, with silver at his temples. Behind him rode a younger man who shared his sharp features, and a woman in a traveling dress that had seen better days. Martha, the woman's voice carried clear across the yard. Martha Grace Sullivan. Martha's heart sank. That's my cousin, Elizabeth. She touched Joseph's arm. It's all right. They're family. But nothing about this felt all right. She could see it in the way the men's eyes tracked over the cabin, over Joseph, over the small signs of a life being built together, the expanded garden plot, the new chicken coop, the laundry line with both their clothes hanging side by side. Elizabeth dismounted first, picking her way across the muddy yard with exaggerated care. "Martha, thank God you're alive. When your letter reached us, we could hardly believe—" "What letter?" Martha interrupted. "The one you sent from Fort Bridger, about wintering with a—" Elizabeth's eyes slid to Joseph, who stood silent and watchful in the doorway. "With a guide." Martha remembered now the letter she'd asked a passing trapper to carry down, just to let someone know she lived. She'd been careful with her words, but apparently not careful enough. "Uncle Robert." She nodded to the older man, who dismounted but hung back. "Cousin James, I didn't expect—" "Of course we came," Robert interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "No decent family would leave a woman in such circumstances. We've come to take you home." "I am home." The words fell into sudden silence. Elizabeth's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. James, who'd tried to court Martha years ago, before Thomas flushed dark red. "Don't be ridiculous," Robert said. "You can't stay here with him?" The last word dripped contempt. "It isn't proper. It isn't done." "Much about my life isn't done," Martha said evenly. "Won't you come in? I've fresh bread and coffee." "Martha." Elizabeth caught her arm as the men remained frozen by their horses. "What are you thinking? Do you know what people are saying, the scandal?" "I imagine they're saying many things." Martha gently freed her arm. "As they did when Thomas's wife arrived. Scandal seems to follow me regardless of my choices." "This is different. This is—" Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper, darting glances at Joseph. "He's a savage. Martha, you can't seriously think—" "His name is Joseph Crow Feather." Martha's voice could have cut glass. "He saved my life. He's educated, honorable, and I'll thank you not to insult him at his own door." Joseph touched her shoulder. A gentle warning. "Invite them in," he said quietly. "The laws of hospitality are sacred." So Martha found herself serving coffee to people who looked around the cabin like they expected to find scalps hanging from the rafters. Joseph stood by the fire, having offered his chair to Elizabeth, his presence both protective and challenging. "The winter must have been difficult," Robert said, clearly trying to find neutral ground. "Less difficult than some," Martha replied. "Joseph is an excellent provider." "And when the snow melted," James spoke for the first time, his pale eyes fixed on Martha with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Why didn't you come down?" "Because I chose to stay." "You can't have chosen this." Elizabeth gestured helplessly around the cabin. "Martha, you were meant for better things. A proper house. A position in society." "Whose society?" Martha set down her coffee cup harder than necessary. "The same society that welcomed Thomas Morrison and his lies, that whispered behind fans while I served their meals." She stood, pacing to the window. "I've found something real here. Elizabeth, something true." "You've found isolation and hardship," Robert corrected, "and a liaison that can only end in grief. Be sensible. Martha, come back with us. We'll say you were rescued, cared for through winter. No one need know." "I know." Martha turned to face them. "I know every moment, every choice, and I choose this life. I choose him." "Then you choose to be cast out," Robert said flatly. "No decent family will receive you. No town will welcome you. Your children—" He stopped, his face flushing as he realized the implication. "Will be loved," Martha finished. "Raised with stories from two traditions, taught to write and read, to hunt and write, to be bridges between worlds." "Bridges," James laughed, ugly and sharp. "Half-breeds. You mean neither one thing nor the other. Is that what you want?" Joseph moved then, just a shift of weight. But James stepped back. What she wants, Joseph said quietly, is the life she's chosen, as is her right. Rights. Robert stood, his coffee untouched. You speak of rights, you have no right to her, no right to— Uncle, Martha's voice cut through his building tirade. You came here out of duty, and I respect that, but my duty is to my own heart, my own life. Your life, Elizabeth stood as well, tears streaming down her face. What life can you have here when illness comes? Where's the doctor when you need supplies? Where's the store when you want conversation? Companionship. I have companionship. Martha moved to stand beside Joseph, their shoulders touching. I have everything I need. For now, Robert said coldly. But when the novelty wears off, when you remember what you've given up, it'll be too late then. Martha, we won't come again. I understand. They stared at each other, family by blood, strangers by choice. Finally, Robert turned to the door. Come, he told the others. We've done what we could. But Elizabeth lingered. Martha, please, think about what you're doing. It's not too late. It's been too late since the night I fell, Martha said softly. Since he carried me through the snow and gave me shelter. Since I learned that kindness speaks louder than propriety, that love matters more than approval. Elizabeth shook her head, gathering her muddy skirts. At the door, she turned back. I'll pray for you. Pray for understanding, Martha suggested. For all of us. After they left, the cabin felt too quiet. Martha stood at the window, watching her family ride away, taking with them her last connections to the world she'd known. Joseph came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. You could have gone, he said quietly. I would have understood. She leaned back against his chest. No, you wouldn't have, but you'd have let me go anyway, because you're foolish that way. Foolish. Thinking I could leave you, thinking I'd want their world over ours. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. Joseph, do you know what I thought when I saw them? Those proper people with their proper clothes and proper scandals. What? I thought they looked like strangers, like people from a story I'd once heard but couldn't quite remember. She touched his face. This is real. You're real. The rest is just noise. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. They're right about the hardships, about what the world will do what it always does, judge and gossip and condemn. Let it. She smiled, fierce and free. We'll be too busy living to notice. That evening, as they sat down to the simple meal they'd prepared together, Joseph raised his coffee cup. To bridges, he said, to the courage to build them. To the courage to cross them, Martha added, touching her cup to his. Outside, spring rushed toward summer, the mountains green and alive with possibility. The family that had come to save her was gone, but Martha felt no loss. She'd made her choice with eyes wide open, chosen love over comfort, truth over acceptance. No regrets, Joseph asked as they cleared the dishes together. One, she admitted, and saw concern flash in his eyes. I regret that I have only one life to give you. He laughed then, rich and full, and pulled her into a dance around their small kitchen. Greedy woman, one life isn't enough. Not nearly, she smiled up at him. But it's a start. The oil lamp cast warm shadows as night settled over the mountains. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, supplies to gather, plans to make, a life to build in defiance of all convention. But tonight, in their cabin that had become a home, two people who'd chosen each other over all the world danced to music only they could hear. And in that dance was revolution. Quiet and complete the revolution of hearts that refused to be bound by anything but love. Dawn painted the valley in shades of gold and rose, the kind of light that made even ordinary things look blessed. Martha stood on the cabin's new porch Joseph had built it during the spring months, saying she needed a proper place to watch sunrises and breathed in the crisp mountain air. 6 months had passed since her family's visit. 6 months of building a life that fit like comfortable boots. Ready? Joseph emerged from the cabin, dressed in his best shirt, the one she'd embroidered with small blue flowers along the collar. His hair was tied back with the leather cord she'd braided for him, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that still made her heart skip. As ready as one can be for their wedding day. She smoothed down her dress, not white, but a practical blue that would serve her well after today. The wildflowers in her hair were the only concession to tradition. They'd decided to leave at first light, make the 2-day journey to Denver where Joseph's friend, Judge Abraham Walker, had agreed to marry them. Not legally binding in the eyes of the territory, perhaps, but real in every way that mattered. Belle and Joseph's paint horse were saddled and waiting, their breath steaming in the cool air. The pack mule carried supplies and the few possessions they couldn't leave behind: her mother's Bible, his brother's books, the carved wooden bird Joseph had finished that first winter night. "The cabin will be fine," Joseph said, reading her backward glance. "Samuel promised to check on it." Samuel Clearwater, another mixed-blood man who lived a day's ride north, had become their closest neighbor and friend. His existence had been a revelation to Martha, proof that others had found ways to live between worlds, to build lives outside society's narrow definitions. They mounted up and began the descent, the horses picking their way carefully down trails that Martha now knew as well as Joseph did. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, a cathedral more magnificent than any built by human hands. "Tell me again about Judge Walker," Martha said as they rode side by side. "We scouted together, years ago. He saw enough of how the world really works to stop believing in simple divisions." Joseph smiled. "He says the law is what we make it, not what others tell us it must be." They camped that night by a stream, under stars so bright they seemed touchable. Joseph built a small fire while Martha laid out their bedrolls. They'd done this so many times now it was like a dance, each knowing their part without words needed. "Nervous?" he asked over their simple meal. "No," she considered. "Maybe a little. Not about marrying you, about what comes after, the life we're choosing." "We've already been living it," he pointed out. "This just makes it official in our own eyes. And God's—" Joseph was quiet for a moment. "I think God cares more about love than law. David used to say the Creator laughs at human boundaries, all our little rules about who can love whom." He took her hand. "If there's sin in this, it's not in our loving." They reached Denver late the next afternoon, the city sprawling rough and ambitious at the foot of the mountains. Martha had almost forgotten the noise of civilization, the shouts of teamsters, the clang of construction, the constant human clamor. Joseph rode closer to her, protective without being obvious about it. Judge Walker's house sat on a quiet street, modest but well-kept. The man who answered their knock was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes and prematurely white hair. "Joseph Crowfeather," he said warmly, clasping Joseph's hand. "And you must be Martha. Come in, come in. My wife's been cooking all day in your honor." The ceremony took place in the judge's study as the sun set, painting the room golden. Mrs. Walker and their grown daughter served as witnesses, treating the occasion with the same dignity they'd have shown any wedding. "Do you, Martha Grace Sullivan, take this man to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." The words came out strong and certain. "Do you, Joseph Crowfeather, take this woman to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by my own conscience and the love I see before me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Judge Walker smiled. "Kiss your bride, Joseph." The kiss was gentle, a promise and a seal. When they parted, Martha saw tears in Mrs. Walker's eyes. "Beautiful," she murmured, just beautiful. They stayed the night with the Walkers, sharing stories and laughter around the dinner table. It felt like a glimpse of what might be possible people who saw them as simply Martha and Joseph, not as a scandal or a problem to be solved. The next morning, they began the journey home. Home. The word had taken on new meaning, deeper and richer than any dwelling. Home was Joseph's hand in hers. Was mornings by the fire and evenings watching stars appear. Home was choosing each other, again and again, in defiance of a world that would rather they stayed apart. As they climbed back into the mountains, Martha felt something settle in her chest, a rightness as solid as the peaks around them. She thought of her mother, who'd faced the unknown with courage, of Joseph's grandmother, who'd told stories of stars that chose to become human for love, of David, who'd dreamed of bridges. "What are you thinking?" Joseph asked, reading her contemplative mood. That they were all right, all the ones who came before, who loved boldly despite the odds. She smiled at him. "We're not the first to choose this path." "No, and we won't be the last." He gestured to the valley spreading below them. "Someday, what seems impossible to them will just be life. Ordinary life." "I don't want ordinary," Martha said. "I want this extraordinary and difficult and real." They reached the cabin as afternoon shadows grew long. Everything was as they'd left it, but somehow different too. This was their married home now. Humble as it was, the place where they'd build their future, raise their children, grow old together if fate allowed. Joseph lifted her down from Belle, held her a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crowfeather." The name sounded strange and perfect all at once. Martha Sullivan was the woman who'd fled Bitter Creek in pain and confusion. Martha Crowfeather was the woman who'd chosen love over fear, truth over convention. That evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sun gild the mountains, Joseph pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "A wedding gift," he said, suddenly shy. Inside was a silver hair comb, delicately worked with tiny birds in flight, Apache craftsmanship with a design that could grace any lady's table in any city. "It's beautiful," Martha breathed. "It was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother on her wedding day." He touched it gently. "Two worlds in one piece. Like us." Martha turned so he could place it in her hair, feeling the weight of history and hope in that simple gesture. "Thank you for this. For everything. For catching me when I fell." "You caught me too," he said softly. "I just didn't know I was falling until you arrived." The stars came out one by one, each a point of light in the vast darkness. Somewhere an owl called, and its mate answered. The mountains stood eternal, keeping their secrets and sheltering those brave enough to make their own paths. Martha leaned into her husband's warmth, thinking of all the conventional joys she'd given up: church weddings, family gatherings, social acceptance. Such small prices for what she'd gained. A love that saw her truly, a life lived honestly, a home built on truth rather than pretense. "No regrets?" Joseph asked, echoing his question from months before. "Only one," she said, and smiled at his look of concern. "That it took me so long to fall off that horse." His laughter rang out across the valley, rich and free. "Stubborn woman, you'd have found another way to me. Stubborn man, you'd have found me first." They sat in comfortable silence as night settled over their mountains. Tomorrow would bring its challenges always. There were challenges, but tonight they were simply Martha and Joseph Crowfeather. Two people who'd chosen love over fear, who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. The cabin stood behind them, solid and sure. No longer a refuge, but a beginning. And in the vast wilderness of the Colorado mountains, far from the judgments of a narrow world, a new kind of life took root, one planted in love, watered with courage, and growing toward a future that others might someday call ordinary. But for now, for them, it was perfect. It was theirs. It was home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying this tale of Martha and Joseph, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We love connecting with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their journey. Your support helps us bring more of these frontier romances to life.